And we're live. Hello, sir.
Hello there. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, man?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Yes, we've got a bit of sunshine in Britain. Of course, it's pretty freezing cold. It looks so inviting from inside the house. As soon as you go outside, it's a bit cold. But
Oh,
yes, the
nice.
spring is coming, and things are gradually opening up in the physical world. But there's always kind of a sword of Damocles hanging over that. So I'm kind of glad to be in the online space, really. How about you? How's life in
Well,
Seattle? Oh, actually, you're not in Seattle, are you? You're in California.
California life, man. It's
Yeah.
good. It's good. We're gonna go run around today, have some fun, eat somewhere fun, and yeah, it's gonna be good. But what is the sword of Damocles hanging over London? What?
The sort
I
of
mean,
Damocles, not hanging over London specifically. For once, since the pandemic's begun, really, I was like an early adopter. I got it. We shut down. London got shut down in, I think, the
yeah.
last week of March, and I got COVID the week after that because I'd been running around London making a living, and
Oh,
of course, exposing myself to the virus. But no, London's okay at the moment. But obviously, India is not, Brazil is not, bits of the States are not, and Europe is struggling for once, and it's a very dense population.
wait.
So
I
I
meant,
guess
what
it's
is
going
the
to.
sword of Damocles?
The
That's
sword of
what I
Damocles
meant.
is really the
Please
reinfection from.
refresh us on your Greek mythology.
It's the sword of Damocles. Oh well, it's basically a sword that hangs over some dude called Damocles, I think, and it hangs by a thread. So we're not
Oh,
sure whether it's going to fall, but if it could fall at any moment. And really, the
oh,
reinfection. I guess Britain's got an amazing vaccine rollout. My left shoulder is testament to the fact that it
yeah,
hurts a bit, but it's protecting me and all the rest of it. And the rates of infection and deaths are going down in the UK, but it isn't the rest of the world, and we're a globally connected economy here. So,
oh
and
man,
really, no man's an island, right? We're going to have to deal with it globally. So, I guess what I'm saying is, from the sort of selfish e-commerce point of view, being online centered is a much safer, less of a bucking bronco than having an offline
yeah,
centered business if you're dealing with events or physical retail stores and all the rest of it. That they're going to go
yeah.
through a lot of waves, I think, over the next while.
I totally agree. All right, well, we are live in our groups, and so if you're watching with us, give us a like, love, comment, say hello, tell us where you're watching from, give us a little shout out. If you're like me on the West Coast, on America, you're bright and early here, 7:30 in the morning. And of course, Michael there in London, what are you, 4 o'clock, 4:30, something like that?
Yeah, 3:30 in
Yeah,
the afternoon. That's right.
3:30.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just checking
All
that
right.
we're going live into the groups. Yeah, looks like it's all
Yeah.
working. The technology is
Good.
behaving. This is all good.
All right. Well, we've got our first hello. Hello, Kimberly. We're excited to broadcast this conversation today into the groups. We have a fun one today. So today's conversation is going to be all about comparing Amazon business models, and you get to pick your online selling adventure, yes,
Yeah,
or
choose
your
your own
online
adventure. Absolutely
path
right.
path to success. And so, many people have been oriented towards a certain particular method, or business model. And I guess what you could say in some ways is, as coaches, Michael and I get to see at sort of a 30,000 foot view many people's models, and the pros and cons of those models and how they work, the ins and outs, and the pain points, and the promise of the models. And
Yeah,
so, in this episode of the live e-commerce um, leader podcast, we're going to talk through those details. So I think it's going to be a great one. I'm really looking forward to this. Michael, you've put time and energy into the outline here for today. So
mm,
I think it looks wonderful to me. And I'm excited about the opportunity to talk about these various models. So,
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's as befits the e-commerce leaders approach. We generally so come descend from the 50,000 view to the 10,000 foot, but we don't get buried in the weeds. And there's plenty of podcasts out there, like a ton of podcasts and YouTube videos and what have you, and including the stuff on my own channel, Amazing FBA, whichever way around this is, 5 years worth of content, a lot of which is quite tactical. But I think
yeah.
what is important is to see the wood for the trees. It's absolutely no good getting your head down and getting obsessed with taking action, which is one of those things, people say, take action, action, action. No, that's absolutely critical. Action orientation for an entrepreneur is really, really important. So without that, nothing happens. Having said that, if you are that kind of person, some time to reflect on where on earth you're heading with all this action is really critical, because if there's a mismatch at the higher level between who you are and what business model you're running, then that pretty much condemns it to at least mediocrity, if not outright failure. And that's something you need to look at the big picture first, I believe, before you plunge into the detail.
Yeah, totally agree. All right. Well, with that said, now that we've got a cohort of people here who are hanging out with us in the groups, uh, and we've got some Brits in the house too. Andrew says hello.
Hi
There
there,
you
Andrew.
go. All
How you
right.
doing?
Awesome. Let's kick it off. Let's do this formally. We're going to start our intro to the podcast. And as you guys know that do this with us on Sundays, we will literally take this MP3 file out of this video and then put it into the podcast format going forward. So let's kick it off, and we'll go from there. Michael, you ready to rock and roll?
I'm ready to go, man. I'm here.
All right.
I'm stoked, as you say in California.
All right. Let's do it. This week, Michael's overview and comparison of the main Amazon business models is going to be something of interest for everyone. It's a great opportunity to really understand how best to build an Amazon business. Things that you can get wrong can really mess you up for the long term. And if you have a mismatch from where you're starting to where you're ending, it can really be a problem financially and in terms of your time and energy investment. But if you get it right, you can have a smoother path to success and learning and scaling a business. So, Michael, I'm thrilled to be able to talk about e-commerce business models that we can execute on Amazon with you. How are you thinking about this topic, and are you ready to jump into it today?
I'm absolutely ready. I love that "Are you ready?" question each week. It's one of our traditions on this podcast. I love it. You're such a gentleman, Jason. I love it. So yeah, how am I approaching it? Well, to be clear, I think the first thing to say is mostly this is about sourcing models, with the odd exception. But it turns out that has such a profound impact on the skill set you need and the money you need and the complexity that I think effectively they are kind of different business models, although there's obviously overlap as well. One of the interesting things I think for those listening, whether you're at the very beginning of the journey, haven't even sold anything on e-commerce platforms yet, including Amazon, or whether you are quite an advanced and experienced seller, I think there's always a danger in getting over focused on one model, and actually that can be bigger for those who've only operated one model for years than it is for somebody starting off. So I think that there's something for everyone here, whatever your situation. What I'm going to do is to simply move through the models as I perceive it, from the simple towards the complex, and the financial requirements get bigger as we go, but the wins hopefully can get bigger in size. That said, any one of these models can be scaled up to a full-size business, if you like. So it's not so much better or worse or sophisticated or unsophisticated as a sort of match between how the model operates and who you are and what your resources are at any given point.
I think it's fair to say if you ask someone how many business models they need, the answer really is just one that works.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely,
So
yes.
if your first business model works really well for you on Amazon, then don't look any further. And if you're happy as a clam and you think, man, my business is as good as I could ever have dreamt it to be, then it's just about refining that business model. But if you're in the situation where you say to yourself, now that I've learned how to do this, I see the weaknesses in it, and I'm wondering if I can really scale a business on the back of this business model, then you're in the situation where learning about more would make a ton of sense. Okay, so Michael, what are the kind of main issues to think about when you are looking at business models? What is a high level overview in terms of your framework for thinking about them?
Sure. So really, what tends to happen is that people look at a business model like they look at a pair of shoes or clothing in a shop or in an advert, or even a house, and they kind of get sold into the idea of something because it looks glamorous on the model. And what really matters is how well it fits you and your situation, and also where you want to go. But more importantly than anything, it fits who you are right now. So really, the first question, most important, is who is it for? The capital requirements are very linked to that, but it's not the only thing. The speed of return and the sort of personalities that work and don't work with some of these models. And so, in short, pros and cons, and then suggestions also for how this might fit into your skills development journey. If you are, as you said, if you've got a business model that's working, exactly as you say, I just double down on that and refine it. But quite often things half work but aren't satisfying. And at that point, it may be time to pivot to a different business model, maybe a couple of times until you find something where you can really hit your groove.
Okay. And obviously, let's just small conversation. I mean, it is a generally, implemented together are very, very common amongst sellers. And sorry, my internet just broke, I think, for a moment. But you get the idea that the business
It
model
did.
is very,
Jason, could you
very
just redo? So sorry to stop you. Your internet did indeed
sure.
break for a bit. So do you want to just
Yeah,
restart from the previous point?
sure. Sure. So obviously, for the sake of the conversation, we should define what we mean by a business model. And I think we probably just assume that people know what that means, but there are different types of strategies and tactics that you can execute that are they become named and known as a certain type of business nestled into the Amazon ecosystem. Is that how you look at these in terms of the phrase of a business model? Is there any other nuance there you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be in favour of simplifying this down. So broadly speaking, as I said, I think it's more or less by the sort of sourcing or how you get the products, whether you're buying
Yeah.
existing ones or creating them. So I would divide it into three groups, really. Two main groups, and then a third one that's worth exploring, but I don't personally know much about. But we should mention. Group A, as I'll call it, is reselling existing products. So that includes
Hmm.
RA, OA, and
Hmm.
replens, wholesale, even used books, which I guess is a subset of RA,
Hmm.
retail arbitrage, that is to say. There's developing products to a greater or lesser degree, private label, lightly customized, custom produced stuff, and then handcrafted, which is a subset of the others. And then there's digital publishing, which includes
Hmm.
things like KDB publishing and merch as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Love it. Okay, so we're going to dive into each of those, just give a little bit of a detail, kind of explain them and walk through them. So in this conversation, we'll walk through all of those with the high level pros and cons.
Hmm.
And so let's do that. Let's jump into this first set, which you called the reselling business models.
Hmm.
And so you want to kind of just break those down one by one, and we can chime in. I can chime in on each one. How do you want to walk through the list here?
Yeah, why don't we do them one by one at a time? Because I think
Okay.
that there's high level and then there's overly high level.
Yeah.
So let's talk about each one.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
great. All right. I'll just pick one. You want to go back and forth? Maybe let's just do it like that. So the first one that we've got here that we want to talk about is used books.
yeah.
Sourcing used books and selling them on Amazon is a well-worn business model. Greg Murphy is the American expert on the topic and is a good guy. He does a lot of teaching. And I forget the exact URL of his website, but it's something like Bus Proof Business or something like that. His whole premise is if you get hit by a bus, you need to have a business that continues to work without you. But he focuses on large scale used book sourcing and selling.
Hmm.
And it can be gold. You can find rare books, for example, that you can sell on eBay for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. But most of the time, it's about finding books that are in demand but not oversupplied, and learning that game is of interest. And so that's the used books model. And
Yeah,
obviously, it feeds into Amazon very nicely.
it does. I mean, I can't say that I've done this at scale. I've done little bits of it and actually found it pretty profitable, but I didn't bother to scale it up because it wasn't ever
Yeah,
something I was wanting to scale because I was focused on private label and
yeah.
unique products. But what I would say is, from those who've done a lot of this stuff, and I work with a lady called Robin Best, who I can't remember the name of her site either. I think it's even changed. Robin Johnson, I should say, and it was Best from the
That's
Nest.
from the
Major change.
nest.
That's from
Hmm.
the Nest. That's the one. Lovely lady, former minister, interestingly enough. So not at all your typical,
Hmm.
young capitalist selling lemonade stand at the age of whatever 5. But anyway, so she's big on used books as a good starting point. It can, of course, scale as Greg Murphy says
Hmm.
to a big business like anything else. I mean, let's not forget that Jeff Bezos considered about 20 different product types when he was going cross country from New York to Washington State, and of course he decided on books for a very good reason. So they're very
Hmm.
resellable. There's a lot of simplicity compared to other things. As soon as you start selling other types of products, you start interacting with the legislation or Amazon requirements. Whether you're selling face cream or some other product that seems fairly simple. And of course, books are books, so they have one product type, even though there's millions and millions
Hmm.
of different possibilities within that. So I think it's a very good starting point if you're not sure what to do and you if any interest in books and you've got some decent bookshops near you
Yeah.
that sell secondhand or any other sources like libraries and things like that. I don't know the detail, but I do think that it's
Yeah.
very cheap and straightforward to start. And for some people, it could be something to scale up to a big business if you really wanted to.
Can I just mention one little thing here before we uh, use book selling? Is I would imagine that in a place, there would be opportunity to source books that are old that aren't online and
Mm.
first editions or books like that. I just wonder if that's an angle for those who are in the UK or in Europe where you could just source these rarer books, older, books that people might be looking for. I don't know, just a thought, but
I
there
really
you have
just
it.
don't know from experience. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess it comes down to the old question of where does your target customer hang out? Now, if target customers are
Hmm.
online and on Amazon,
Yeah.
then that would work very well. And the chances
Hmm.
are that that could be the case. I'd really want to investigate that because it could be that people who
Yeah.
really love rare books are really anti-Amazon, and that's quite possible as well. So I just don't
Maybe.
don't know from
Yeah.
experience. I can say though, from personal experience, I've sold books that I bought for about £50, so about £75. I sold them for 200. There are
Hmm.
some rare books around just in my local charity shop. Now that's in a very educated, wealthy area, so where you
Hmm.
source makes a difference. But those weren't rare or collectible books. I think one of them was a Boss book, as some kind of fashion-led thing.
Hmm.
That I
Yeah.
just looked it up on Amazon. I'm like, well, holy smokes, I should be able to sell this for a lot of money. I held
Yeah.
on to it for months, by the way. So holding on to stock for months is a problem in the modern Amazon world, and that is one
Yeah.
of the downsides of books. So you may end up having to store them off Amazon. So
So,
that is one of the downsides, I guess.
yeah, in the comments, Andrew from the UK said some of the top sellers on eBay, UK, are booksellers, and that
Yeah,
there is an opportunity for the Europeans to source rarer books that people around the world might like. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so that's
interesting.
book
Yeah,
sourcing. Let's
yeah.
move on.
So retail
Retail
arbitrage is
arbitrage. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
it's the next one. So
Yeah,
that's
go
the
ahead.
classic as publicized, I guess, by our friend Chris Green. He's probably not overly focused on that now, but made it famous
Mhm.
for years and kind of came up with the term. And obviously, this is the classic play to start with. Again, traditionally, you start with a small amount of money. It can be scaled up to a very big business. If you're going to scale it up to a big business, I would say that it's not going to be that simple. I would actually say that a business of a similar profit level, if it's retail arbitrage and versus a private label, it's going to be more complex than the retail arb
Okay.
one. But
Okay.
it's much friendly to start with. You can get quicker wins. You can go and
Yeah.
buy stock today and get it selling within a week.
Yeah.
And you can start with a pretty small amount of money, a few $100 probably. And
Yeah.
similar thing with online arbitrage. Robin was talking about when I interviewed her a while ago, and she's had a lot of experience coaching people in this area, which I haven't. So this is a little bit secondhand, but the
Hmm.
people that do well in retail arbitrage are very action oriented, don't like to plan too much maybe, and want to get started. And if you have got that itch, then that's going to be a model that works better for you. Obviously, in COVID times, that's been very, very hard to do in
Right.
practical terms. I guess we're coming up to a window of opportunity both in UK and America, maybe in mainland Europe if you're listening from there. And maybe it's going to take a little bit longer because of the COVID situation, but it's bound to be opening back up. And I
Yeah.
guess that we're going to have a lot of retailers that are really struggling and wanting to get offload stock. So I imagine there's going to be
Mhm.
good buying opportunity quite
Yeah.
soon in that way.
Yeah.
So that's retail arb. I don't have a lot of experience, but what I can say is that you end up with a lot of complexity quite quickly because
Yeah.
you'll end up with quite a lot of different product lines just
Yeah.
to make enough revenue to live off or to begin to build a
Yeah.
business.
Well, I have one story for retail arbitrage, and I just tell it over and over. So I don't have a lot of experience either. But my one story is I walked into Office Depot one time and saw a bunch of items in a shopping cart at the front that said marked for clearance, and they were the scratch on labels like the of names and words and numbers for like putting on glass, and they were supposed to be, I think, 50 cents a piece. And then when the lady rang up, they were a penny a piece. So I bought the entire shopping cart worth, I think it was 280 packages, because I had looked on my phone and they were selling for $10 each on Amazon.
Wow.
So I spent $2.80 on the product, and I went home, sent them into Amazon, and we sold those for several years. And that's my retail arbitrage story. I will say that retail arbitrage is, I think, obviously an opportunity for people who live in a metropolitan area that have access to stores or can drive to cities. It's obviously because as it says, retail arbitrage. It's intended for you to find stores to walk into. The other deviation of this model that my buddy has implemented with perfection is garage saling, which is a form of retail arbitrage. And garage find box items that are spectacular in terms of the return on investment. You know, items for $1 at a garage sale, and sell them for, huge profit on Amazon. So that's another angle on retail arbitrage, I would say, is garage selling. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. And I guess that in the end, retail arbitrage implies that you buy it from a retail source, but I mean, it's really wherever you can buy it at a cheaper price. So yeah, listen, this can go very big. One thing I would say, to your point of, if you're living in a metropolitan area, you can then service the big rural areas in America that are devoid of shops. And because of the geography, because you've got a huge continent with only 330 million or 331 million people there, it's really different to the UK, because the geography of the UK is much more condensed in terms of the population. We've got 66 million people, so about a fifth of the people and about a 20th of the land. It's really crowded. So the opportunity to arbitrage a difference between being able to source something cool in a metropolitan area and then being able to source it online for hundreds of miles away is less in the UK. So although RA is an opportunity here, it's not the same as it is in the States. So I would say it's an opportunity I'd take more seriously if I were in the States than I would in the UK for that reason.
Sure, totally right. Okay, so that's retail arbitrage. Most people are familiar with that, although I will say this, just as a tease. We're going to go deeper into retail arbitrage this summer and actually I think what we're going to do is a big challenge, and it'll be tied to the software that, we have, Legendary Software Tools. We're relaunching those and rebranding, and I think we're going to do a fun retail arbitrage challenge and really go into great detail with true experts. And I think that'll be really fun, because I do think there's huge opportunity there. I say that there's opportunity there because my personal story is, I wanted to sell online for 10 years and I just didn't know what to sell. I didn't know how to do it. And this is from 1998 to 2007, 2008. And so to me, retail arbitrage serves as a fantastic gateway drug to broader opportunities. And I think that the framing of this is important, Michael. Maybe you can speak into this before we talk about online arbitrage for a moment. But these things tend to naturally lead. It's kind of like there's a path you can go on where you start with retail arbitrage, and then the next thing you learn is this next one, which is online arbitrage. And then it seems like that is a natural progression to private label or wholesale selling, and then to customized products that in a brand that you build for yourself. I don't know, just if you want to speak to the nature of that progression, is that what you see happen frequently? It seems like it's just it's inherent in the system of Amazon selling that people tend to do that.
Well, interesting. I guess there's the internal and external dynamics. Let's talk about that. So the internal dynamic of the business, i.e. the business owner and their capital, as you accumulate more capital, assuming that you're successful in selling in the use books, retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, you then have the capital to address things like wholesale or private label, where you can 10x the amount of capital needed, or 5x. So wholesale, you're going to need $500 to $1,000 to more like $2,000 really to do a serious job on it. With private labeling these days, honestly, I wouldn't advise people to go in with less than $10,000, because the market's getting bigger, which means there's more money to be made, but there's more competition, so you have to fight harder to enter it. But to come back to your question then, so that's one thing. The other one is, as you grow in confidence, you can take bigger risks and add more skill sets. Now, whilst retail arbitrage can demand a huge amount of stock and cash management skill if you scale that up, what you don't have to, and that is not a small business. I mean, that is not a small ask. A friend of mine is literally a rocket scientist. He was a business partner of mine for a while in a private label business that we ran. Did a lot of retail arbitrage, and he was very meticulous in his measurement, but you really have to be on top of it. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's simple, but the number of skill sets needed is smaller, meaning that you have to be on top of stock management, you have to be on top of your cash flow management, and you have to be able to read the runes, if you like, in the Amazon marketplace. But what you don't have to do is do keyword-based research. It's product-based. You don't have to develop products. You don't have to source them. You don't have to do all the branding work. So for that reason, that's another reason for progression, in the sense that you're adding new skill sets. So by the time you're doing a private label business, you are adding a bunch of other skill sets that you didn't need at the reselling level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally agree.
By the way, that's just the internal dynamic. The external dynamic, though, is even more important, which is, gradually speaking, just trying to resell other people's products is getting harder and harder and less attractive, as Amazon does that more and more efficiently. So then you get to pure private labeling, and that was more attractive in 2013-14 when I started. That was the kind of apogee, the high point of private label. But nowadays, that's getting more and more competitive because Amazon's got very good relationships with the Chinese sellers. So now we need to be more customized.
Yeah.
So there's that external dynamic
Good
forcing
points.
us down the lines of complexity,
Yeah.
if you will.
Okay. All right. So with that said, let's go to our next topic, which is online arbitrage. So online arbitrage is obviously the deviation to source not in retail stores or at garage sales, but to source from other websites. So you source online, you sell online. Power of that model, thoughts on online arbitrage from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the power is you don't have to leave the house. So, I mean, that's in times of COVID extremely important. I mean, really, and not just in times of COVID. What does that even mean? I mean, people talk about it as if there's sunlit uplands the other side of mass vaccination. My understanding, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but we need to kind of take account of it because it's so significant to economics and this sourcing model question. My understanding is mass vaccination isn't actually what's wiped out things like smallpox in the past. So I'm not actually convinced there's going to be as sunlit as people say. I hope as a human being that it is. But I would say as a business owner, I would rather have a part of my business at least that is not vulnerable to can I physically go to the shops or not. So that's why I think online arbitrage has a particular importance in 2021 and beyond possibly. So in terms of the sort of person it is, I think it's a different personality to some degree because it's going to be very online. It's going to be more of an analytical type personality. And as one of the things as we go through from retail arb through online arb and wholesale, I think it requires more happiness with spreadsheets and analysis and using tools because you're not literally just standing there chatting to the chap who runs the local supermarket or whatever it is you're sourcing from or warehouse and having conversations person to person. So I do know one of the people that I saw doing quite a good transition into this from as an early stage. I was actually working with him in a private label group for newcomers to the business. Who did really well is not only German, who tend to be more analytical, but was actually a computer programmer, and he did a very nice job of setting up his online arbitrage business with very well thought out tools that kind of in a systematic way. So there is actually quite a lot of analytical thought that goes into being an online arbitrager. I think perhaps more than people acknowledge up front, and you do need to be quite meticulous and happy with analyzing data. For some people, that's just not their bag. For others, it really works for them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I totally have seen that play out over the years where people I've known, my kids included and others, have gotten into the system of learning how to do retail arbitrage or online arbitrage. And then ultimately the decision to go forward is really about their personality and their interest in it, not so much the actual functioning of the business model. And I think that's obviously just is super important to think through is it's not just whether it works, it's whether it works for me, which is what you said at the beginning of this podcast. So I totally agree.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
If you find yourself getting miserable and overwhelmed, sooner or later that's going to show up in the numbers anyway. So that's the point where you either need to scale it up and scale yourself out of the day-to-day operations, or if there isn't enough money to scale yourself out of the operations and you hate it, then what you've done, if you stick with it, is created a job that you hate for yourself, which is really unwise. And it's surprisingly easy to do that because Amazon is, to quote the name of one of the courses out there, an amazing selling machine. It is incredible at what it does. But it doesn't. It's not a happiness machine. Nobody guaranteed that you'd enjoy the process. So it's really important. This is why the business model thinking that we're talking about, this is when it becomes critical to know that you're thinking. You're putting an artificial dichotomy. You're either going to go A, give up on what I'm doing even though it's kind of working, or B, keep going and be miserable. Well, that's a hell of a that's Hobson's choice, right? There is an option C, which is keep working on Amazon, learn, redeploy a lot of the skills you've learned and the environment you've learned, but do a business model which suits your personality more. And that's why I think this kind of thinking is so important.
Yeah. Well, obviously, the next business model is replens, which is basically a strategy of product sourcing that could be tied to retail arbitrage or online arbitrage. But the focus or phrasing of replens is that you're emphasizing products that are replenishable items, meaning that the customer is buying them frequently over and over again, and that you can, in essence, source profitably. And so the replens model is, we're broadcasting live into the 30-day replens challenge. It's being taught by and really pioneered by Danny Stock, and then other people who have learned from him and scaled to really successful heights. Kate Chaddock, of course, is in the group, 7-figure replens seller. Jimmy Smith did training for us this last replens seller. And so this model of replens, I think, is really powerful. not in the Replens Challenge group, then look for that content in the future from us. And I think technically you could still hit replenschallenge.com and sign up, but we're going to be closing it real soon. By the time you listen to this podcast, it'll probably be closed. But it is a model that's very interesting because it gives a predictability to the items that you're focused on. It's retail arbitrage and online arbitrage can be horribly random and unpredictable in terms of what you're finding and selling. And Replens is really a strategy that narrows that down so that you've got a set of ASINs that you focus on that are in essence proven winners that you can go back to over and over and over again. So it's kind of a sifting and sorting process to find those types of ASINs to sell.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And by the way, that kind of responds to the main reason I've never bothered to learn retail arbitrage or take it more seriously is not because people don't make millions doing it, but I just find the idea of going back to somebody where you've made a ton of money with a product and then you go back to the source and they go, oh no, we haven't got any more of that. Just the soul destroying idea because it's not always easy to find products that sell profitably, and therefore I think the Replens thing it answers that question. And for me personally, if I were going to start this out, apart from playing with the used books, which I've done a bit, in retail arb, which I've done tiny bits really amateurishly just to kind of get the experience, I wouldn't be in any way interested in doing those at any scale because of what you just said. The randomness, it sounds horrendous. You can't build a business very well on randomness. You can manage randomness, but that's a massive challenge. So I would definitely see Replens as my sort of starting point if I was starting again and I wanted to just keep it relatively affordable and simple, but on the other hand scalable. Replens to me answers a lot of those problems. So I think it's a super smart model to consider for sure.
Sure. So what's our next one?
Well, the next one is still a reselling model. So there are two others which are very linked, which is also about reselling. One of them is a kind of halfway house into kind of developing products, and that is wholesale sourcing. So I guess eventually, and this is again where I would probably get impatient with randomness and unpredictability and just want a scalable system, because I just don't want to be going around those circles too many times, is you just develop relationships with people who are brand owners, theoretically manufacturers. If they're in the United States, the UK, they're probably not manufacturing, they're probably importing mostly from China, maybe other places. And the art there is to be able to so the upside is massive, which is predictability. And if you've got products already selling under a brand which is successful on Amazon, then you have kind of guaranteed the demand side, which is huge compared to private labeling, which we'll talk about in a minute. The downside is obviously got to persuade people to work with you. And if you have no track record, that's harder. And if you don't have a track record and you haven't got the right personality, you're going to hate this, because it's not like retail arb where you can go out today and by Friday be selling stuff and get the cash in your pocket on Monday or two weeks later. But the cash will show up in your Amazon account straight away, and 2 weeks later you get it into your bank account. It's going to take time to approach a lot of people. There's going to be a lot of rejection. So I would say that the fundamental skill set here is business to business sales that is added on top of the other skills there. Obviously, if you're going to scale a retail arb business, you'll get to know store owners and stuff as well, but this is intrinsic to the business model. But if you can do that, if you can contact a lot of people at scale, manage that process, and then persuade some people through persuasion conversations, aka sales, then this can really work for you. And for what it's worth, I'm strongly considering starting a wholesale wing to my Amazon operations, because for that reason, I'm not a product development guy, whereas I'm comfortable with business to business sales. So if that's you, that could work for you. If you love products and hate conversations, it definitely won't work for you.
I think this model is very interesting. So I'll speak into it a little bit, because we do have some coaching clients that are very, very successful 7-figure wholesale sellers. And I'll just speak a bit about the model. I think you express something that's interesting, which is the first question is, who are you comfortable having conversations with? If you're comfortable having a conversation with the clerk at a local store when you're buying items to do retail arbitrage, that's one level of comfort. If you're comfortable talking to the company at a corporate level where you can ask to be a seller and set up a wholesale selling account with them, that's a different level of comfort conversation. But if you're comfortable in that space, then the opportunities are out there. The other piece that's really fascinating to me here, and I think everyone who's in the Replens Challenge and who's listening to this arbitrage should listen to this section really carefully and think through this. As soon as you set up a wholesale business, it gives you the opportunity to create a brand, because what you can do is go deep into a sub niche on Amazon. So you can create a brand that's a beauty brand or a fashion brand or a outdoor garden tools brand, or whatever it is. You take sub niche strategy and you can create a brand that then allows you to sell offline as well. You can have a Shopify site, and I know this because we have clients that I personally work with that are 7-figure sellers that do exactly this. So this isn't hypothetical. I mean, I could name the names and tell you exact details, but I obviously can't do that. But what they've done is they've taken wholesale opportunities from the companies and then created a niche brand that is the overarching store brand. It's like naming a store. It's like creating a store. And then the items they put in their store are all just the wholesale products that they've sourced. And so that line of thinking takes you in a completely new direction that can lead you off Amazon. And so that's really powerful. Now, the only downside to the wholesale model, in my view, is two things. One is you're not going to get Looney Tunes return on investment at the product level. You'll get keystone pricing, which is they'll sell it to you for $10, knowing that you can probably sell it for $20. And they might even have minimum advertised pricing requiring that you sell it at $20. And so that's the margin framework that you play in terms of the unit costs. And that's just a more lean, more kind of efficient model to have to run. And so hopefully that makes sense. Michael, jump in here, but there's also some questions in the group, I think, as well.
Yeah, great. Well, let's maybe deal with the questions a bit later, but I mean, if they're simple ones, we can nail them, because I'm aware we've got a few more products models to look at. So I think you're showing your plant, by the way, but I mean, anyway. So let me summarize with my thoughts. Predictability, scalability. You can create a brand, as you said, absolutely correct. I've got 2 clients that are doing that, one particularly on quite a big scale. They have their own direct-to-consumer site, whether it's on Shopify or some other thing. That's about 10% of their sales. The downside, though, is kind of the same thing. I mean, first of all, for those starting out, you need much more capital. When I say much more, it's $1,000 or $2,000 to really start. I mean, that won't give you scaling power, but it's a lot less than private label or custom products. It's a longer time to get started compared to RA, as we said. But really speaking, if you're looking at the bigger picture, 2 things. First, for the margins, as you said, are a lot lower. And the second thing is you can create a brand that's a kind of reselling brand, and then your primary skill set is brand curation, not creation. So in other words, you'll have taste in whose stuff to resell. The downside, as I'm experiencing recently with some clients of mine that are looking at selling the businesses, it's really hard to sell a reselling business. And that's when that's normally when the clients are starting to work with me, because they're really wanting to create their own private label side of things. So there are some downsides for the more ambitious people as well.
Okay, let me answer the question real quick. Kimberly asked, what's the difference between wholesale and replens? Is it the case that, or almost all, wholesale is considered replens, but replens are not wholesale? So I think it's a great question, and I'll just say it this way. The concept of replens is phrasing that really comes out of the idea of retail arbitrage or online arbitrage, and it's about sourcing specific types of items under that model. So it's sort of a sub system within retail or online arbitrage. And you're right, wholesale items, obviously any item that's bought frequently would fall into the phrasing of replenishable. And so wholesale items ideally will be ones that are in demand, meaning they will sell over and over and over again, that you have an opportunity to sell that is either not a lot of other sellers are in the space doing the same thing, or you've got an exclusive. Maybe there's a distributor or a manufacturer or something like that you actually can meet. And we have clients in this situation as well. They've met manufacturers, and the manufacturers have said, we hate Amazon. Amazon's a big giant mess. We don't know how to sort it out. We've got people on there selling different prices. We don't even know who they are. And it's an opportunity for you to step in and say, well, you could have maybe your exclusive Amazon distributor, and I'll clean up all that craziness. We'll work brand registered. We'll sort out any drama, get those other sellers wound down over time, and then I'll be your exclusive Amazon seller, and I'll do it right, and you'll know what's happening. And thumbs up all the way around, win-win. And those really are huge opportunities for people who know how to sell on Amazon to approach manufacturers or big distributors and say, let me be your Amazon sales channel manager, in effect, for a percentage or flat fee plus percentage or whatever. Huge opportunity.
Which is a different model again, slightly. But yeah, you're right. I mean, in terms of the cash flow, if it's your own cash at stake or versus somebody else's, that massively changes the scalability, even though the skill set is very similar. So you're right. These all shade into each other. What I would say at that point, even if you're just starting out and just want to, quotes, buy stuff from people, you would have thought, oh, I'm just buying stuff from you, therefore it won't be a problem to get a deal. That's not the case. As you just pointed out, Amazon could be a mess for a lot of brands, and a lot of them aren't keen to have yet another Amazon seller. So what I would say is that implies, to the point that you said about the progression through these skill sets, if you've done some RA and OA and you've really got to understand Amazon and you can point to that experience and some successes, then you have a very different conversation with a brand owner for the wholesale sourcing model. So you're absolutely right. And yes, the aim would often be to be the exclusive reseller, but you're going to have to develop that relationship over time and build trust, I guess. So
the other way you do that, of course, is you create a brand and you have a website, and even ideally a retail store or physical store, even if it's in an antique mall, you have one booth that, it's booth number 42 is you, but it's a business address. And you can be a retailer. Many distributors or product manufacturers will be much more comfortable talking to you if you're a local retailer that also sells online versus a Amazon seller who wants to sell on Amazon. Those are very different things in the mind of the manufacturer. And so, that's one different angle to take.
It is. By the way, there's one little nuance to this, which I haven't personally done or come across before, but there's a very, very good Amazon seller, Jason Boyce, who he and his brother sold on Amazon for, I think, 17 years, many of which were 8-figure years. He's now exclusively running his agency, which is a huge job anyway, called Avenue 7 Media. Super guy. Had him on the podcast a while ago, and we're in conversations about collaborating on various things as well. So he talked about the fact that, as we discussed, and to your point of how do these business models flow into each other, and if you might need to change them, the external dynamic that pushed him to move from retail arbitrage, i.e. reselling stuff, to wholesale arrangements pushed him into this next thing, which is that Amazon would see that Jason and his brothers were reselling successfully on a particular product lines from a particular manufacturer or brand owner, and Amazon would go direct to the brand owner and say, we're going to kick you off Amazon unless you sell direct to us, which is grim but real. And the way that Jason and his brothers got around that was to have the manufacturer make exclusive products for them only, that they would then be the only sellers of. Not only did they become the only sellers of, but they started off as the only sellers of them. So they were kind of using their brand owners as effectively kind of private labelers. So this is a sort of unusual halfway house.
Which leads into the next whole category.
Which leads into the next thing. And the reason it lays in is really important to understand that sooner or later, whatever your reselling skills are, you're very vulnerable to Amazon doing what they've historically done more and more and more over 2 decades now, which is cutting out the middleman or middle person. So you really, sooner or later, if you're not adding value to the supply chain, you tend to get cut from it. And Amazon is very big on doing that. So that's why somebody like a Jason Boyce eventually went to the point of private labeling products, because that means you're going further down the supply chain. So you can't just be cut out of it. So that brings us really onto the finding/developing your own products piece, which is obviously the first thing to say is let's look at the downsides first. Let's be real about this, because there's a lot of hype about this. First of all, you're going to have substantial capital. You're not going to start a private label business with $1,000. I'm sorry, people still say that in 2021 occasionally, which just blows my mind. This is not actually any reality I've seen. It's going to cost you several $1,000s just to get your first product off the ground, and that's just for the first batch of inventory. And then if you get a product off the ground, you kind of want to restock it because you spent all that time, money and energy getting something you planned for success, as you've said, Jason, on our podcast before, not just for failure. So if it takes off, where's the extra money to fund that? So what looks like a $5,000 project will normally turn out to be 10, and I'm not going to get into the maths of that there because I've run it 100 times on the podcast. But you need to prepare for not only your first order of stock, you need to actually sell it, in other words, launch costs, and then you need to restock it. Having said all that, and the fact that it takes several months, maybe 9 months to get launched, obviously what's great is that you own the listing effectively, because you're the only person selling the product. You get to dictate the packaging, and you're starting to really build a brand that is not just a reseller brand. In other words, you're not just good at curating other people's products, which is a valid business model. And I've got an 8-figure seller primarily doing that in one of the groups I run, but it is not so defensible. But you're starting to build a product brand, and that means you're really starting to build something more defensible that you can own, and are definitely more sellable, because right now private label based businesses on Amazon are selling like hotcakes. So that is a whole different ball game and a whole different upside, but it's a much bigger fight, and you need to be really determined and sure that you want to do this thing.
And you've got a great training on private label. I will say that on private label, there are teachers who teach people to do it, I'll just say, stupidly. And the stupid way to do a private label business is to actually not care about the brand name, to not put any time and thought into creating a brand. I encounter people sometimes who, in our coaching process, we have an intake form, and they'll say, well, I sell on Amazon private label. And I'll say, what's your brand? And they're like, well, we have a few, but they're not real brands. And as soon as they say that, I know they've been a victim of this bad training, because what you want to do with private label is put on the brand creator, brand manager hat, and really understand that you're making a unique entity, and that people can bond with that unique entity if you do it right. And that whole element of branding is so critical to me. You can go look on Udemy. We have a course on branding that we teach. And I would just say, if you haven't gotten into private label yet, but you want to, just be sure to really think through the elements of a successful brand and learn about them. Go read books about them. There are many books about, successful branding, and realize that you're building something that could be a 7, 8, 10-figure asset. Or you're creating something of no value that's really just got no, real energy or enthusiasm, and that would be a huge mistake.
I agree. And by the way, if you've gone through at least a little bit of reselling work before you start, which I didn't, because I was pitched straight into private labeling, which is not the best start. I got into it because I was pitched rather than somebody thought it was the right thing for me. So I would say a responsible trainer should offer this kind of open people's eyes to the possibilities of the different business models, and then help direct somebody towards the one that's right for the person at the stage they're at. Because if you come to this from doing wholesale type sourcing, you are first of all realistic about the downsides of wholesale, so you're not going to bitch and moan, to put it frankly, when things are a bit challenging for the private label, because there's a reason it's challenging, because the upside on the other side is bigger. But also you're going to understand the difference between a brand and just a bunch of generic rubbish, because you will have bought from people who develop proper brands if you're wholesale sourcing, or even retail arbitrage. If you're reselling, you're probably reselling something that has some kind of established brand. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any profit margin left in it for you to sell against them. So you're absolutely bang on. Reselling a bunch of random products from China is a disaster, because you don't really have any brand equity or anything real. It's not going to be sellable. It's just a kind of rubbish version of retail arbitrage, but just over a bigger distance, i.e. it's coming from China, so you're having to buy 3 months worth of stock, or for whatever, or wait 3 months to get the stuff in. So you're absolutely bang on. You have to get proper training, and also you're absolutely right. If you're going to do this, you need to build a real brand, or don't bother in the first place.
Yeah, totally agree. But with those things said, it does create a huge opportunity. And the brand, again, just like with the idea for wholesaling, it gives you the platform opportunity to launch on further platforms beyond Amazon. Shopify site, sell on Walmart, sell on other sites. It's a huge opportunity. eBay, Walmart, Amazon are sort of fantastic opportunities if you have a brand. And then on your own direct to consumer site, you of course make the most money. You collect the most data, and you have the biggest work to do, but the biggest opportunity as well.
That's
So,
true. The only thing I would say is there are certain that can be, some products will sell across lots of different channels and do
hmm
beautifully. And I'm not saying that one shouldn't aim to build a brand that gets off Amazon as early as possible, because you probably should. Amazon has a lot of downsides and risks, as well as, good cash flow opportunities. But what I would say is some products will work really well on Amazon because they're keyword driven.
hmm
Some will not. I've helped a couple of people sell products on Amazon. They've really struggled, and I've said to them, frankly, you've got your own direct to consumer site. This is more suited to that, because
hmm
it's one of those products which, when people see it, when they're browsing through a sort of focused set of stuff, let's say you're in the stationery space and there's some unusual pen design, people see it and they think that's really cool. They click on the listing, they look at it, and they're sold on your brand because they're on your site and they've experienced other products from you, and they'll take a risk because it looks cool. Now, if it's not keyword driven, that product will never show up in a sort of brand driven
Yeah.
browsing way on Amazon, because most people are driven by keywords on Amazon.
Yeah.
So there are some products, there's a bit of a nuance, but it's an important one. Some products that will work in retail stores or your own direct to consumer site that just will die on Amazon from not having enough demand. So you need
Yeah.
to be very mindful about where you're trying to sell a product before you start creating it, I would say,
Yeah.
from that point of view as well.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings us to our next business opportunity or business model, which is lightly customized
Yeah.
products. And
Yeah.
so I'll describe this from my point of view, and then have you share yours as well. Um, our, I think it's fair to say our most successful client that we work with, it's a coaching client, um, basically was an industry expert and saw the products that were available in that industry and knew that the products were deficient in a couple specific ways, because he and his, they as a group were industry experts. And so went to a manufacturer and said, can you change the product in the following ways? The manufacturer said, yeah, we could do that if you want to. It's more expensive, but whatever. And then they said, yes, please give us that. So it was a lightly customized product, if you will, that the manufacturer just made some changes for that were personalized to this company. And as it happens, they took it to Amazon, and it became the Amazon's choice. It became the highest reviewed, best reviewed. It became the number one product on other blogs and articles off of Amazon, where they point people to the best of type categories, and they crush it. And it totally worked because they had insight and perspective on the industry that they were operating in, and they knew the small changes that would really, it was like little hinges that swing big doors type idea. And it's a genius implementation of this lightly customized product that they created a brand around.
Really good story. I think there's a few things that come out of that. I mean, first of all, I want to clarify the difference between what we just called private label, or what I call pure private label, when you literally only putting your logo and packaging on a product that is otherwise exactly the same as the manufacturer's product, versus the lightly customized thing. The first thing I want to say, just to kind of diss the pure private label thing, is I would say don't do this at home. The upside is not worth the downside here, because what happens is that if you've got the same different packaging but the same exact product, Amazon consumers aren't so stupid that they won't notice that the images in the product search results page just look exactly the same. And so it become a price war, which is kind of similar to the downsides of retail arbitrage or wholesale. But guess what? The downsides of private label are on top of that, which is it costs more and takes longer to get going. So I think the only way to go, if you're going to private label at all, is to lightly customize. That's the first thing to say. I don't think pure private label is in any way a wise thing to do now. I just don't advise anyone to do it, period. And I could say that pretty definitively, because I've seen so many people come to grief with that, and it takes a long time. If you're going to come to grief, let's fail quickly and move on. Don't spend 9 months doing something that's built in failure. So the lightly customized thing, I think what strikes me about your client above all is the words industry expert. They had insights and perspective on where the products needed to change, and that's the absolutely critical thing. And this is the downside of private label. If you're going to develop products, you really need to understand the space, and a lot of people come to me, and that's why I tend to try not to work with people who have no idea what they want to do, because they're really hard to help. They come to me and they say, okay, you know about Amazon? Yes, I do. And they say, okay, what should I sell? I'm like, I can't tell you that really. I can give you a lot of criteria, but in the end, you're going to have to decide what you care about and who you want to serve. And I've done my best for 5 years. We're in our 6th year of one-to-one coaching now here, but I've done my best to substitute for a lack of imagination or caring about a single set of customers and their needs, and I can't compensate for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone can. If you don't have a particular group of people you have an insight into, it's extremely hard to create any kind of business. And that's what I
Right.
would say. You've got to be willing to get your hands dirty, have conversations with people, care about a particular set of problems in some pretty much detail, I would say.
Sage advice, man. Sage advice. And it's because you care, you learn, you go so deep, and it's
Exactly.
so interesting when you start to learn about the wide world we live in and the various niches and industries. And it's like anything else. If you hear about the sewing industry and you know nothing about it, you're like, is that a thing? Or you hear about just pick any random niche or industry that you're not familiar with. You just don't know anything about it, and to think that you could sell to those people it's not realistic. So love something, learn about it, be an industry expert, lean into your vast decades of prior experience. Especially the story that's common to me is I've had this conversation multiple times, so I know it's a mental trap where people who have a 30, 40-year career in an industry, like they're an electrician or something, or a plumber, or some like elevator repair person, or some specialty thing, and then they want to have a career selling online, and they say, well, I want to sell t-shirts. And I'm like, wait, you're an expert as an electrician, but you want to sell t-shirts? What about selling something for electricians?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I'm tired of that. Like,
I know I've had
well,
so many conversations like that, man, over the last few years, and you're so right. I mean, turning your back on 2 decades of experience is a crazy, crazy idea. I mean,
yeah,
try and understand that you don't have to have the downsides of being an electrician. If you're dealing with selling an electrical product online, you're going to have different
yeah,
problems and different upsides,
yeah,
but
yeah,
you can still utilize all those decades of experience
yeah,
and to put you ahead of the game. You have to have a
yeah.
competitive advantage and you have to add value. If you don't have those two things,
Hmm.
it's toast. It doesn't matter what the business model is. Those are very basic principles. And because Amazon is a very efficient market, don't forget it was set up by a Wall Street guy who's used to the efficiency of stock markets and
Yeah,
that brutal but efficient comparison, which is good for the consumer and not so good for producers who are inefficient. If you're not adding value or solving a problem better, then you shouldn't really expect to get paid.
right.
Which really brings us to the ninth, because I'm aware of time
Yeah,
ticking. The ninth
yeah,
version is very similar to. There's a sort of graded scale between pure private label, lightly customized, and custom produced product. So I guess the difference is you start with literally a clean slate or drawing
hmm,
board and work with the product designer to start from scratch. That's going to cost you more time, more money, and it's more complex, obviously. But the upside is it's more defensible. You're going to get more passionate reactions from consumers if you get it right, and potentially therefore a higher price and better conversion rates. So I would just say I would start with light customization in the private label sphere, and then move on to custom produced products as and when you're ready, because it's more complex, but
yeah,
it is more defensible. And ultimately, in a product based business, if you're going to have a real product based brand, you need to have a unique product, not kind of
yeah,
different. And that's a more expensive, risky thing, but it gives you solid competitive advantage if you have it that could last for years if you get it
yeah.
right.
And I would just add to this conversation that the lightly customized and custom product, that's a spectrum. What's the difference? I like it would be hard to say the difference between what lightly customized means, and because is there any new type of product like imaginable? That's very
Yeah,
rare.
I would
Most
say
people, sorry, I was just going to say, most people approach the topic by saying what is currently in existence and what's a form factor or change or unique element to it that I could bring to the party.
true.
And so it is on a spectrum. And so I wouldn't get hung
Yeah,
up on these two differences. I
true.
would just say if you're starting with a product from a manufacturer and asking them to make changes to it, you're in the ball game of some version of lightly to fully customized product creation. Yeah.
That's true. The only thing I would say is that the starting point might literally be a blank slate as opposed to an existing product. But you're right.
Hmm.
You don't want to get hung up on it. I mean, in the
Yeah.
end, this is another classic mistake that people make that blows my mind. They will spend $3,000 or $4,000 on some private label Amazon course, but they won't spend a few $100 buying everybody's competitive products and trying them out
Hmm.
vigorously at home. And that's
Yeah.
insane. I mean, you need to do that research anyway, and you may start off with an existing product and say,
Yeah.
actually, this is pretty good. And then,
Yeah.
of course, you've got to be very expert in the patent issues or patent issues and have a
Yeah.
good lawyer. And again, if you're going to spend $10,000, $20,000 customizing a product, spend $1,000 on legal fees. I mean,
Mhm.
do the job. Don't mess about with the intellectual property law. I mean, it's just not worth it. I mean, Americans are very litigious, but it's not that much better in the UK. You just want to do the job thoroughly. So there's
Yeah.
obviously a lot of downsides because a lot of complexity in time, but really the upside is very big when measured over years, I would say. Now, a
Mhm.
little nuance that I love this, personal favorite, handcrafted or rural sourcing is, again, you can do either lightly customizing or a unique product. But what's different about this compared to mass produced product, if you're mass producing a product in China, for example, you might pay $5,000 for the mold one if it's got 3 or 4 different plastic molds or silicon, and then $2,000 for this mold, etc. And then you have to produce 4,000 of them or they're not interested. Whereas if you're handcrafted, if stuff is made by hand, by definition, you can kind of produce things in pretty small quantities. So the massive upside is that you can mass produce, you can produce a product that is truly unique, and you could do it at a quantity of 100 or 200. And I'm working on that with a couple of clients right now, and it really is a different ball game because you're risking
Oh.
$1,000 or 2,000 on your first product run, even though it's completely unique custom product,
Mhm.
rather than 20,000. It's just an astronomical difference in the finance and the risk, and also as a beautiful side effect that economically, sustainably sourced, I should say, ecologically and kind of what's the word, humanitarian sustained sourcing is very fashionable and will become, it's a very long-term trend. So from
Yeah.
the consumer selling point of view, it's great for the marketing as well. So I'm a big fan of that right now.
I love that. Well, before we go on to the final type of business model on Amazon, let me just pop in another question from the audience here, the live audience. Um, Amjid said, please suggest the best way to find wholesale sources and distributors. And this is a great question. And Michael, where I thought you were about to take your comments, you didn't, but it answers this question, and so I'll tie them together. Um, I have one fun story that I remember hearing about, and a wonderful couple I met at a conference once. I asked them what they do and their journey on selling on Amazon, and they said that they live in a fairly rural place. It's in Northern California, as it happens, a little town called Corning, and it's about, I don't know, an hour from me right now as I sit here. And their journey was that they went to this idea of selling on Amazon, started with retail arbitrage, got clearances and discount items. And then I think they were at the farmer's market and they found a product. And I don't know that they'll care that I say it, but it was olive oil. And the area of Northern California that they live in is a massive hub for high quality olive growers and olive oil manufacturers. And so there are many like farms that do this, almost like wineries, that have their vineyard setups, and then they have the wineries. And so they do that same thing with olive trees and olive production, olive oil. And they found a award-winning, state fair-winning producer who had no clue about selling on Amazon, didn't care to, didn't want to. And they literally just started working with that person and then sold their brand. I think they made it a private label brand. And their story, as I recall, was pallets and pallets and pallets shipped in. It had scaled tremendously. And so the issue there was the sourcing, and the rural sourcing was a unique twist. And I think that if you live in the rural places of the world where there are unique elements, like maybe it's wool manufacturing, or it's some type of specialty food product, or so many things around the world are unique to those regions. That's an opportunity for sourcing. And then to answer the question more broadly than that, I would say there are trade associations and industries. ASD is a huge conference people go to in the U.S. to find relationships with wholesale distributors and product makers. And there are many such places. People even do trade show tours to China to just see what exists in China. There's a whole industry around that. And whole areas of go-to for certain types of products. So those types of sourcing strategies are what you learn about as you get into this idea of finding products to resell. So I just wanted to mention that before we go on to the third type of product creation or business model.
Yeah,
Michael, any
just
thoughts on
quickly to
that?
the wholesale sourcing thing.
Yeah.
Another approach, which is more online, and I guess you're not necessarily going to get such great margins, but might be simpler to start with, is to kind of reverse sourcing, as some people call it. So you look on Amazon for the types of
Hmm.
products, and you filter down to products that look like they could have some margin and could be good a choice. For example, there's not insane numbers of people reselling them, and you know that the amount per reseller is reasonable, that the price is reasonably stable, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
and then to figure out who is selling those and to approach those. That's going to
Hmm.
require a lot of mass production of emails and contacts. So that's like a numbers game. I guess if you're more of a people person, and an important caveat, if COVID permits you to do so, going to trade shows is going to be in some ways a lot more expensive than legwork and airfares and rail fares. But on the other hand, or car miles, on the other hand, might be less kind of numbers driven. So it's going to be possibly a blend, but it will partly depend, again, like the RA versus OA idea. In essence, business wise, it's the same model. But in practice, you may find that the more analytical and sort of behind a computer version works for
Hmm.
you, and other people might find that more in person works.
Live from the studio audience, another question. How well do handmade items or those kinds of things that you're talking about sourcing, Michael, how do they sell on Amazon? And obviously it opens other doors, Etsy and eBay, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera.
Well, I wouldn't say that there is I mean, there may or may not be a handmade category on Amazon as categorized by Amazon, but I'm thinking more a sourcing model. So you could very easily
Yeah.
have again, bear in mind, Amazon shopping's really simple. We all do it. I guess that you would as well, that it's keyword driven, right? So the categories are less important than they would be in a shop, which is obviously a physical retail store. You only have one way of a taxonomy, if you like. The arrangement of stuff is physically laid out in a rigid way. So the answer is they do really well potentially, but it depends on what's out there and what your consumers want. So you might well be selling something like, I don't know, barbecue equipment, and the average thing might be made of plastic from China. The better stuff might be made of metal from somewhere else, and then you might sell beautiful hand carved wooden ones at $50 each instead of $5 each. It will be driven by similar keywords, but then you've got to think about a couple of things. First of all, it's really an intersection between the type of consumer and the keywords they use. Who would be buying? Is there somebody out there who loves beautiful handmade stuff in a particular category? And then what keywords do they use? And can you kind of punch through the noise on the platform? So there's no simple answer
Yeah.
to that, but I mean, broadly speaking, yes, there's always a big appetite in certain areas like interior design and kitchenware. There seem to be trends towards handmade stuff, and those go through waves. And the other thing is, I don't really know because I'm not the consumer of that. So you need to really understand a particular type of consumer, to the point we made
Hmm.
earlier, to really know the answer to that. Is there an opportunity for handmade goods
Yeah.
in this area? Depends who you're selling to. In some markets, yes. And the great thing about it is that not only can you have lower MOQ, or load of minimum order quantity is much lower, but also you can, generally speaking, sell for a higher price point because there's a higher
Hmm.
perceived value depending on the market.
I love it. There is actually a Amazon handmade category that they created, or site they created a year and a half ago to compete with Etsy. So,
Interesting.
but I love your twist on it, where you're finding items that could be handmade, but I guess you could say small batch made in a uniform way. That because there are challenges there related to uniqueness of items for product photography, etc. But if you can solve some of those items and make items that are handmade, but are in essence the same item,
Yeah.
and can sell for a premium, I love that angle. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's working well for a couple of my clients. I mean, I just
Hmm.
think it's underused. Most people
Yeah.
automatically go to Alibaba, which is a disaster.
Hmm.
Don't do that, guys.
Yeah.
Or to China, and there are having to order a huge number of things once you're doing a unique or fairly unique product is a
Yeah.
huge risk factor. And if you can
Yeah.
reduce that risk factor, again, it comes down to the financial management. Actually, even though it seems like it's about a product category thing, it's more about the finance.
Yeah.
If I could order 100 unique products made of silicone, I would care less, really.
Hmm.
It's still a good reason.
Well, let's dive into our final category of business model, and that is digital publishing. I added this one to the list, so I'll just mention there's just two things I wanted to talk about with this one. The first one, which has been all the rage in the last 2 or 3 years, is merch, which is digital art that you can upload and sell on items in Amazon. Now, that model has been worked on for the last few years. Of course, Chris Green who pioneers many things, pioneered and popularized this idea, I think, to many people. And then Neil Lassen and his business, Merch Informer, has become really a go-to resource for understanding how to use merch as a business model. It is, in essence, a digital art-based business. Now, digital art-based business with sales on Amazon was not something that was of interest to me, but I will tell you this. In the last 2 or 3 months, the idea of NFTs, which if you're not familiar with that phrase, go put it on YouTube and you can see all the, insight in with it. But non-fungible tokens is a cryptocurrency or blockchain-based system for provenance for digital assets. And if you haven't heard anything about this, then you might go research it a bit. There are people who are making unique art and selling it now under this structure of NFTs, and the items are selling for millions and millions of dollars. Christie's recently did an auction for an artist named Beeple, Beeple, and his items went for, I think it was $67 million. And I think that was the second or third highest amount any living artist has ever received for an item that they've sold. And so if you're in merch right now, go research NFTs, go research selling on the NFT marketplaces. It is an odd and maybe highly profitable twist to this idea of digital art. Michael, have you heard about any of this? I just dropped all this on you. We've never talked about
I
it.
had no idea. It's a fascinating thing. I would say that
Yeah.
here's all I would say to that. This is my British
Yes.
pouring cold water. You know what I'm like. Being an author could make you J.K. Rowling, who's worth over $500 million. Most of the time it won't. So I would say $67 million sounds extraordinary. I don't know NFT, so I don't know the model, so I can't really comment on that. What I would say in the more
Yes.
mundane, everyday way is that
Yes.
merch, if you really love producing designs or you've got somebody on your side who can do it, is potentially an amazing opportunity. I know a
Yes.
few people who've nibbled at the edges. I don't really know people who've done it seriously, so I can't speak to it
Yeah.
that way. The only thing I would say is that it is a very low barrier to entry, and whilst that means it could be a great way to get started yourself, and who knows, maybe it'll make you millions. And please get in touch with us if it does. Love to hear it. And it is doing really well for some people, but generally I'm always wary of very low barrier to entry markets when they're as huge as Amazon.
Yeah.
So that's all I would say about it.
I like that feedback, and I don't disagree. I knew your British sensibilities would pour a little bit of cooler water on the topic, but let me just
Maybe
say
it's just
this.
me, man.
No, no,
Go on.
no. I think it's fair enough, but let me just say this. The attributes of a digital goods business model has two components. One is that there's near no barrier to entry. The other, though, is there's almost unlimited upside potential. So you're right. It's a weird and different business because on the lowest end of the spectrum, you can be competing with a million different people who have all different quality levels. On the upside potential, it can go stratospheric. And in between is what's called near zero marginal cost. So, in essence, a digital good business has no inventory holding cost. You don't have to reorder. You don't have to have an MOQ. You don't have to have any of those things because they're irrelevant to a digital goods model. And
Yeah.
that is one of the benefits of implementing it if you can make it work. So, those are things to research. So, that's the first one was merge. The second one, of course, is self publishing using Kindle, the KDP platform, which is the phrase now that Amazon uses for both Kindle digital books, but also for physical paperback books. They used to have something called Create Space. It was a company they bought, but they've repositioned the whole thing under KDP so that you can now create both the Kindle version and the paperback version. And they're even testing hardback books now with some sellers. And so having a self-publishing business is certainly a direction to go in. And I keep telling people, and I'm trying to weave this into my client practice and work with coaches in the coaching work that I do with students, is self-publishing can be a model that you bolt onto a brand or a wholesale selling business model, or a, anything that where there's a physical business model. And the way you do that is education. So in any niche or industry, if there's people who don't understand the thing, if they need how-to guides, if they need reviews, if they need comparisons, which one is better, the top 10 list for this or that, all of those types of information needs are the groundwork upon which you could build a digital goods catalog and bolt into your existing physical items. It really is that simple, and it will create a revenue stream for you in your branded products that is a completely different mathematics used in different ways for things like free gifts for lead generation, et cetera, et cetera. So I really challenge people to look into digital goods, even if they have a core product that is a branded physical item. I think there's huge value there.
Totally with you on that. And here's what I would say. First of all, I mean, I've got to honour the fact that you and Sim have made a good living from digital goods. And I'm a total believer in the potential of that. I think there's a difference for me between merch and self-publishing is this. I don't know if it's true that it's easier to create physical designs for t-shirts. I'm a word-based guy. If you're very, very focused, again, to the point of a business model matching with who you are, if you're an absolute whiz at graphic design and you passionately love it, then that could be a perfect model for you. For me, I think the wonderful thing about books is that a lot of us have a book in us. I'm certainly one of those people, but somehow people perceive books to be so hard that most people don't get round to writing one compared to whacking up some t-shirt design with some cutesy slogan on it, right? Now, that may or may not be true for certain individual people. For me, although there's not much barrier to entry to creating a book, in theory, in practice, you've got to create a book. And we've talked about that before. And there is quite a process to go through. And I think there's a mental barrier to entry, which I kind of find attractive because I want to find barriers to entry. So if there's something that's a mental barrier to entry for a lot of other people, but you can break past it, I'm absolutely with you on not only the opportunity of books or forms of books as a product in themselves, but I totally agree with you that having as part of a product stack is super smart. And again, because most people don't do it, it's an opportunity hidden in plain sight, I think. So I'm with you on that one.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. We're well past an hour. And we've had a great time with it. So I think this will probably produce 2 or maybe 3 podcasts. I'm not sure. But wonderful conversation, Michael. I really appreciate your insights and perspective on the various business models. And so let's wrap it up. What's the takeaway in terms of next steps for people who are listening to this and want to go deeper? Obviously, you've got private label expertise. You could teach people private label through one-on-one coaching. You want to just mention how they can connect with you and those types of details?
Sure. So if you go to amazingfba.com, FBA is in fulfilled by Amazon, amazingfba.com/mentoring. That's where I do one-to-one work. I quite often work these days with people who've got established businesses but want to spin them up in the private label space, and or they've got wholesale background. Sometimes they're doing quite big numbers, but they want to add private label products to the mix. And the 10K Collective Mastermind, if you're doing at least $50,000 a month or so upwards, could be the place for you as well. So just go to theamazonmastermind.com if you want to check that out.
Awesome. And if you want to follow up with me and learn more about our coaching and small groups, you can do that at winningonshopify.com. And there's a coaching tab there where you can learn more. So thanks again, Michael. Really, really appreciate the chance to do these sessions with you. It's always an honor, and we'll leave it there.
Thanks, man. Yeah, always an honor as well.
Okay, that's our podcast. Thumbs up. Thanks for hanging out with us in this group, everyone, and hopefully we've caught everybody's questions. I think we wove them in, and so appreciate everyone being live with us this morning or this evening in London time. Anything else for the good of the order for our live audience here, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, this stuff can feel very complicated, but in essence, it's a bit like choosing a car or dating or something. I mean, before you plunge into a decision to commit to something, 2 things. First of all, date it for a bit. If you're doing retail arbitrage or online arbitrage, you don't need to make a massive commitment for the next year. You could try it for 90 days. But I would say 90 days is kind of the minimum time to try anything. What I would advise against is trying to run 2 or 3 business models at once, unless you're really already experienced and established. That's a good way to guaranteed failure. And then a lot of things like wholesale sourcing or private labeling, I would give it between at least 6 months and preferably a year before you then go, this doesn't work for me. I mean, the third thing related to that is if you've got one product you've tried once, that doesn't mean the business model doesn't work. It means you've tried it with one product. So try, give things a chance before you give up on them as well.
Love it. Great advice, buddy. Well, thank you again. Really, really appreciate the time this morning or this afternoon for you. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And thanks again, everybody, for hanging out with us. If you're watching this by replay and you do have questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below. We'll try to monitor those and follow up as we can to answer those questions. And if you enjoyed this type of format, watching us live are the time to tune in, and we try to do these every week. So there you go. All right, man. Good times. Before my internet completely breaks here, I'm going to shut it off.
Yeah. Okay, man. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.